It was a Tuesday evening when my world shifted. I, David, a 72-year-old retired mechanical engineer, sat at the dinner table in my modest two-story home. My silver hair caught the light from the old lamp, and my knees ached from the day's small chores. Nathan, my only son, had stopped by after work. He barely looked up from his phone as we ate the simple meal I'd prepared. I'd raised him here after his mother passed a decade ago, pouring my life into him. But lately, he dismissed everything I said. I tried again, mentioning his money troubles. "Nathan, listen to my advice. I've seen tough times before." He sighed, rolled his eyes, and muttered, "Dad, you're outdated. The world has moved on without you." Those words hit like a punch to the gut. My fork dropped, clattering on the plate. The room went silent, thick with tension. He didn't even notice how deep it cut. I'd built machines that powered factories across the state, solved problems that stumped others. But to him, I was just an old relic. That insult burned in my chest. I stared at him, my sharp mind racing. He needed a lesson, one that would stick forever. I decided right then to show him who I really was. Just before you continue to watch, Joe would like you to subscribe to this channel and like this video. It would encourage him to keep his streak of thrilling revenge stories for you to watch. Alright, back to the story. That night, after Nathan left without another word, I retreated to my study. The room smelled of old paper and dust, filled with shelves of blueprints from my engineering days. I sat in my worn chair, staring at those faded designs. They reminded me of a younger me, the man who innovated when computers were just dreams. My hands, now wrinkled, had drawn lines that changed industries. Nathan had no clue about the sacrifices, the late nights, the risks, that built the life he took for granted. Anger bubbled up, but it cooled into a firm resolve. He thought I was stuck in the past, but I'd show him the power of experience. Beneath the hurt, I felt a spark of the old fire. My wife would have urged forgiveness, but she wasn't here. It was just me, holding onto my dignity. I stood and unlocked the old drawer in my desk, the one I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a folder marked Retirement Fund Project. Dust flew as I opened it, revealing papers I'd almost forgotten. This was the start. Nathan would learn the hard way that underestimating me was his biggest mistake. With the folder open on my desk, I leafed through the yellowed papers. They detailed a small tech company I'd invested in back when Nathan was in middle school, scraping by on allowance. I'd poured in my savings from overtime shifts, betting on an idea that seemed crazy then. Over the years, that company exploded. Think of it like planting a seed that grew into a money tree. Dividends rolled in monthly, but I never spent a dime, letting it pile up in a separate account. I'd almost forgotten about it amid the grief after my wife's death. Now, staring at the statements, I smiled for the first time since Nathan's insult. The balance was staggering, far more than he could dream. He saw me as a dusty old book on a shelf, but this was proof of my foresight. My mind, still sharp as a tack, buzzed with plans. This fortune wasn't just money, it was leverage. Nathan had dismissed me as outdated, but soon he'd learn the past could bite back hard. I knew exactly how to wield this to humble him, step by careful step. The next weekend rolled around, and Nathan showed up at my door, his face etched with worry. He plopped down in the living room, venting about bills stacking up like unpaid parking tickets. His wife loved fancy dinners and designer bags, he said, and the kids needed new gadgets for school. He danced around asking for money, but his eyes screamed desperation, hinting he'd take a loan if I offered. I leaned back in my armchair, pretending to be puzzled. "Why come to me for help? Didn't you say I'm outdated?" His cheeks turned red, like a kid caught sneaking cookies. He mumbled something about respecting my experience, but then shrugged it off with a forced laugh, as if it was no big deal. That shrug hit me like fuel on a fire. It wasn't just dismissal, it was arrogance wrapped in denial. He'd always assumed I'd bail him out, like I was his personal ATM. No more. I'd teach him respect, but now I saw he needed more, a full breakdown of his pride. That shrug sealed it. I wouldn't stop at a lesson. I'd shatter his ego until he begged for mercy. The days after that weekend blurred into action. I picked up the phone and dialed my old attorney, scheduling a quiet meeting downtown. Then came the financial advisor, a sharp young woman who nodded as I explained my plans. In the dim light of my study, I shifted assets around, stocks, bonds, that hidden company fortune, making sure everything was airtight. I updated my will with deliberate strokes of the pen, cutting Nathan out like a weed from a garden. All of it was about reclaiming control, the kind he thought I'd lost to age. Around him, I played the frail old man, shuffling slower, complaining about aches that weren't always real. He'd pat my shoulder with that pitying smile, thinking he'd won the upper hand. Let him, I thought, smirking inwardly. My mind raced ahead, plotting each step like the blueprints I once drew. Soon, he discovered just how outdated I really was. Not at all. The revenge seeds were planted, and they'd grow thorns sharp enough to prick his pride forever. A couple of weeks later, Nathan invited me over for dinner at his place. It was a fancy spread, steak, wine, the works, in their modern kitchen that screamed new money they didn't have. His wife, always quick with a jab, chuckled about my beat-up old car parked outside. "David, when are you upgrading that relic?" she teased, eyes sparkling with fake kindness. Nathan jumped in, laughing. "Yeah, Dad, maybe it's time to retire from life altogether. Join a home or something." I bit my tongue, forcing a weak smile, letting their words wash over me like acid rain. Inside, my blood boiled, but I watched their arrogance swell, blooming like unchecked weeds in a neglected yard. Every mocking glance, every snide remark, only honed my resolve sharper than a blade. I nodded along, playing the doddering fool they expected. But as I left that night, a plan solidified. Their next dinner would be worlds apart, one they'd choke on, gasping for air amid the ruins of their smug world. The attic air was thick with dust, like breathing in forgotten memories. I climbed the creaky stairs, my knees protesting each step, and dug into boxes stacked like ancient tombs. There they were, yellowed newspaper clippings from my glory days, headlines screaming about awards for my machine designs that revolutionized factories. Photos captured me shaking hands with governors, their smiles wide as if I'd handed them gold. CEOs stood beside me, toasting innovations that saved them millions. I stacked them carefully on the old table, adding my patents, thick packets of diagrams and approvals that proved my genius. Letters of recognition from industry giants piled up, each one a brick in the wall of my legacy. Nathan had dismissed all this as outdated junk, but these were weapons now, sharp as knives. I'd timed the reveal perfectly, dropping it like a bomb when his pride soared highest, watching it explode in his face and leave him in ruins. The phone rang one evening, pulling me from my evening tea. It was Nathan, his voice shaky like a leaf in the wind. He didn't beat around the bush this time, straight up begged for money to cover his mounting debts. "Dad, please, just a loan. I'll pay it back." He tried to sound steady, but the tremble gave him away, desperate as a drowning man clutching at straws. I stayed calm, my tone even as still water. "Sorry, son, I can't. My retirement savings are stretched thin, barely enough for my own bills." The line went dead silent, thicker than fog. I could picture his face, stunned that I'd refused, expecting me to fold like always. He hung up muttering excuses, but that silence screamed volumes. He'd counted on my weakness. Little did he know, this was just the bait in a trap far deadlier than a simple no. I stepped into the lawyer's office downtown, the air smelling of polished wood and fresh coffee. The attorney, a man I'd known for decades, spread out the papers on his desk. With a steady hand, I signed each one, transferring my entire estate, the house, the savings, that hidden fortune from the company, to my grandchildren. They were just kids, full of wide-eyed wonder, untouched by their dad's smug ways. I wanted them to build lives on solid ground, not quicksand of arrogance. The lawyer arched an eyebrow, pen pausing midair. "David, you sure about this? Nathan's your only son." I nodded, explaining how his insults had shown me the truth. He saw me as a dusty shelf, not the architect of his world. Nathan got zilch, not a penny, not the roof he figured was his by right. My signature sealed it, like locking a vault. As I left, a grim satisfaction settled in. All that remained was to watch Nathan dangle from his own greedy rope. Twisting in the wind, he stirred up. My birthday hit like clockwork, and Nathan went all out, hosting a bash at his place with family and neighbors crammed in. Balloons bobbed, cake towered, and he footed the bill, strutting like a peacock in full feather. "Look what I did for Dad," he boasted, clapping backs and pouring drinks, soaking up the praise as if he were the evening star. I sat in the corner, nursing a soda, my silver hair catching the party lights. Folks chatted around me, but I stayed quiet, letting the buzz build. Toasts flew, to health, to family, and Nathan laughed loudest, king of his little castle, thinking he'd outshone the outdated old man. Eyes darted my way now and then, but I waited, patient as a spider in its web. The moment swelled, ripe and ready. Then, as the cheers peaked, I pushed to my feet, cane tapping the floor. The room hushed, all eyes on me. It was time to flip the script. The party noise died as I cleared my throat, standing tall despite my cane. All eyes locked on me, forks hovering midair. My son thinks I'm outdated. I started, voice steady like the machines I once built. Gasps rippled through the room, heads whipping between Nathan and me. His face drained of color, that cocky grin vanishing like smoke. I pulled out the stack from my bag, clippings, patents, photos, and held them high. I designed engines that powered this state, shook hands with leaders who begged for my ideas. I passed them around, watching faces light up with awe. Whispers grew. I had no idea. Respect bloomed where pity had sat, like flowers pushing through cracked concrete. I spoke of late nights sketching blueprints, risks that paid off big. The crowd leaned in, hooked on every word, seeing me not as a frail old-timer, but a legend dusted off. Nathan squirmed in his seat, eyes wide, the air thick with his unease. His smirk was gone, replaced by raw fear, sharp as a blade's edge. I paused, letting the silence stretch like a taut wire, then dropped the bomb. And that small company I invested in years ago, it's worth a fortune now, dividends stacking up untouched. I named the figure, watching jaws drop around the table. Murmurs exploded. Millions? From David. Admiration flooded in, folks clapping my back, toasting the genius they'd overlooked. I locked eyes with Nathan. I'm not as outdated as you think, son. His cheeks burned red, frozen like a deer in headlights, the king dethroned in his own court. The room buzzed with praise for me, whispers of his foolishness cutting deeper than any shout. He tried to laugh it off, but it came out choked, a weak echo in the storm I'd unleashed. Pride shattered. He sat there, small and exposed, the weight of every eye pressing down. But I wasn't finished, not by a long shot. The real twist waited, coiled and ready to strike. The party hung on my words, the air electric. I twisted the knife deeper. I've updated my will, I announced, voice calm as a still pond. Everything, the house, the savings, the fortune, goes straight to my grandchildren. Gasps exploded like fireworks. Forks clattered, eyes bulged. Nathan's jaw dropped, face paling like he'd seen a ghost. He looked ready to sink through the floor, yanked from his throne of smugness. I scanned the room, seeing shock turn to nods of approval. Folks whispered about justice, about teaching lessons. Nathan's wife clutched her napkin, lips tight. I let the silence drag, heavy as lead, before easing back into my chair. The crowd buzzed again, but now with respect for me, pity for him. He bolted upright, chair scraping loud, and stormed out, slamming the door. Murmurs followed, but I sat steady, knowing this was just the spark. The real firestorm, the begging, the cracks, the regret, was brewing, ready to consume his pride whole. Late that night, my phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling me from shallow sleep. It was Nathan, voice cracking like thin ice. "Dad, please," he begged, words tumbling out desperate. "I didn't mean it. You're not outdated. I respect you, always have. Change the will back. We need this." He rambled apologies, painting himself the fool, swearing he'd learned. I listened in the dark, my silver hair fanned on the pillow, mind sharp despite the hour. No yelling from me, just quiet truth. "Words have consequences, son," I said, tone even as a level. That simple line hit harder than thunder. I heard him choke back a sob, his breath ragged. He pleaded more, but I ended the call softly, leaving him in silence. My calmness shattered him worse than rage ever could, stripping away his last defenses. Sleep came easy for me then, but for him, I knew the night stretched endless, regret gnawing like a rat. The next day, his car screeched into my driveway, uninvited and furious. Nathan pounded on my door the next morning, his face twisted like a storm cloud ready to burst. He shoved past when I opened it, demanding I fix the will right then. "This is crazy, Dad. You can't cut me out like that." Spittle flew from his lips, veins bulging in his neck. I leaned on my cane in the hallway, staying calm as a pond at dawn, watching him pace and unravel like a cheap sweater. "You're proving me right, Nathan," I said softly, my voice steady. "All this anger just shows how little you value what I've built." He slammed his fist into the doorframe, frustration boiling over, but I didn't flinch. My knees ached, but my resolve stood firm. He ranted about needing the money, how I'd ruined everything, but his words bounced off me like rain on a tin roof. Then, from outside, his car door creaked open. His wife stepped out, face pale as milk, eyes wide with shock. She marched up the steps, and I knew the real explosion was coming. Nathan's wife stormed onto the porch, her heels clicking sharp on the wood. "David, is it true? All that money in the family, and you never told me?" She whirled on Nathan, eyes blazing like hot coals. "You knew about this and hid it? What else are you keeping from me?" He stammered, hands up like he was warding off a bee swarm, but she didn't let up, accusing him of lies and selfishness right there on my lawn. Their fight erupted like a backyard brawl, voices rising as neighbors twitched curtains to peek. She jabbed a finger at his chest, yelling about trust and secrets. He fired back about her spending habits. I stood silent in the doorway, cane in hand, letting them rip at each other like dogs over a bone. Grass clippings stuck to their shoes as they paced, the argument spiraling wild. It was messy, raw, and exactly what his arrogance deserved. As they drove off, still snarling, a grim smile tugged my lips. That was when I decided to twist the knife even deeper, pushing him further into the hole he'd dug himself. I dug into my old address book and called a buddy from my engineering days, now running a factory that still hummed with one of my patented machines. I pulled strings to get Nathan a spot, not some cushy desk job, but entry-level grunt work, hauling parts and wiping sweat under fluorescent lights. When I told him over coffee, his nose wrinkled like he'd smelled bad milk. "Dad, that's beneath me. I'm better than that," he sneered, crossing his arms. I shrugged, sipping my mug slow. "It's work, son. Pays the bills." He huffed and stormed off, thinking he'd find something grander, like always. But I knew the noose of debt was tightening around his neck, and options were slim as a razor. A month ticked by, and one crisp morning, his car pulled up outside my house. He stepped out in the factory uniform, blue overalls, name tag pinned crooked, eyes downcast like a whipped dog. Nathan had no wiggle room left. Those bills piled up like snow in a blizzard, crushing him flat. He swallowed his pride and took the job, clocking in at dawn with calloused hands by week's end. One afternoon, I drove to the factory, parking out of sight, and watched through the fence. He hustled on the line, fumbling crates, struggling to match the pace of guys half his age who joked and moved like well-oiled gears. Sweat soaked his shirt, face red as a tomato under the strain. Then he spotted me, our eyes locking across the yard. Shame burned in his gaze, hot and raw, like he'd been caught naked in public. For the first time, pity didn't stir in me, just a cold satisfaction, like justice served on a platter. But his fall was far from over. The real humbling lurked around the corner, ready to grind him down further. One rainy evening, Nathan knocked on my door, soaked and slumped like a deflated balloon. He shuffled into the living room, eyes down, and collapsed onto the couch. "Dad, I can't keep this up," he muttered, voice breaking like brittle glass. He admitted it all, how he'd mocked me to cover his own messes, hiding behind snide words because facing his failures hurt too much. No savings, no backup plan, just a mountain of debt swallowing him whole. He looked up, tears mixing with rain on his cheeks, begging for another shot. "Please, give me a chance to fix this." In his eyes, I glimpsed the boy I'd raised, the one who'd skinned knees and dreamed big, now lost in a maze of his own making, scared as a kid in the dark. I stayed silent, my silver hair catching the lamp's glow, mind weighing his words. Pity tugged, but the wound from outdated still stung fresh. Forgiveness hovered like a distant shore, still miles away across choppy waters. I crossed my arms, staring him down. "If you want mercy, prove it publicly," I said, my tone firm as forged steel. He nodded, swallowing hard, knowing what that meant. At the next family barbecue, with aunts, uncles, and cousins milling around the backyard, he stood up on shaky legs. The chatter died as he cleared his throat, face pale as fresh snow. I called Dad outdated, and I was wrong. He confessed, voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. He's the smartest man I know, built things that changed lives, including mine. He praised my inventions, my wisdom, emotion thickening his words until they stuck in his throat. The crowd shifted, eyes soft with surprise. A few nodded approval. Tears stung my own eyes, but I blinked them back, hiding behind a sip of lemonade. He sat down, spent, but the air hummed with change. Yet one last hurdle loomed before I'd even think of easing up, a test to see if his remorse ran deeper than words. After the barbecue, I gathered my grandchildren in the quiet of my backyard, away from the lingering smoke and chatter. They were young, faces bright with curiosity, untouched by the world's sharp edges. I sat them on the grass and explained the will simply. Everything Grandpa has will be yours one day, to help you chase dreams, go to school, build lives. Their eyes grew wide as saucers, sparkling like stars in a clear night sky. The littlest one threw her arms around my neck, whispering, "Thank you, Grandpa," her hug warm and tight. Watching their pure joy, free from greed, my heart swelled. I'd chosen right, shielding them from Nathan's flaws. But as I glanced up, there he stood in the doorway, eavesdropping, his face crumpling like wet paper. Despair etched deep lines around his eyes, a storm brewing behind them. That look haunted me, but I knew it would push him to the brink, sparking a desperate move he'd regret even more. A week later, my phone buzzed with a call from the bank. Someone had tried logging into my accounts, poking around like a thief in the night. I knew it was Nathan, grasping at straws to prove I was wrong, maybe snag a glimpse of that fortune. But I'd locked it all down tight, passwords changed, alerts set like tripwires. I drove to his house that evening, came tapping up the walk. He opened the door, guilt written plain as day on his face. "This is who you've become," I asked quietly, my voice low but cutting like a dull blade through butter. He crumpled then, sliding down the wall, sobs racking his body like waves crashing ashore. No words came, just tears and heaving breaths, his hands covering his face. For the first time, peering past the mess, I spotted real remorse in those red-rimmed eyes, deep, raw, like a wound finally starting to heal. Nathan sat there on the floor, sobs easing into shaky breaths, his eyes pleading like a beggar at a feast. I leaned on my cane, silver hair catching the dim hall light, and laid it out plain. "You got a choice, son. Keep chasing shadows of pride and lose me for good, or swallow that ego, humble up, and rebuild this bridge brick by slow brick." His hands trembled like leaves in a gale as he nodded, the war raging in his gaze, stubborn pride clashing with raw desperation, like oil and water refusing to mix. He wiped his face, voice a whisper cracked as dry earth. "I'll do whatever it takes, Dad. Anything." The words hung heavy, sincere for once, not slicked with excuses. My mind, sharp as ever, weighed them like gold on a scale. Remorse was there, but talk was cheap as dirt. I decided to test his words, push him to prove if this was real change or just another desperate dodge. The months stretched into a full year, and Nathan dove headfirst into the grind. He stuck with that factory job, showing up early, mastering the line like a pro, no more sneers at the blue-collar crowd. Debts chipped away slow but steady. He cut the fancy dinners, sold off gadgets, pinched pennies till they squealed. Around me, the change showed. No eye rolls, just real respect, helping with chores without a grumble, listening to my stories like they were gospel. His arrogance melted away, replaced by a quiet humility that fit him better, like shedding an ill-fitting coat. The bitterness between us thawed bit by bit, conversations flowing easier, laughs creeping back in. My grandchildren noticed too, beaming when he played fair with them. But deep in my chest, that old sting lingered, sharp as a thorn, the word outdated echoing in quiet moments, a ghost I couldn't fully banish. Years piled on like heavy snow, and my body grew frail, knees buckling more, hands shaking with simple tasks. Nathan stepped up as my caretaker, helping with meals, drives to the doctor, even reading the paper aloud. In those quiet times, sitting on the porch at dusk or by the fire on chilly nights, he'd apologize again, voice low and raw. "I can't believe I called you outdated, Dad. That word, it haunts me forever, like a shadow I can't shake." I never forgot it either, that sting echoing in my mind like a bad tune stuck on repeat. But I let him bear the weight, watching it shape him into a better man, humble and kind. The arrogance was gone, replaced by gratitude that showed in every small act. That insult became his lifelong regret, a scar he traced over and over. And that was the sweetest revenge of all, because it bloomed not from my anger, but from the hard, unyielding truth he'd finally faced. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, comment, and smash the subscribe button. Also check out other videos on the channel. Joe's got more interesting stories for you.